It can be very easy to think that new information that we put on the fretboard is unrelated to the other stuff that we already know. But the truth is that anytime we incorporate new information onto the fretboard, it can be attached to the stuff that we already know how to do if we just know how to do that thing, how to attach those things. When you do attach new information to the stuff you already know how to do, you increase your chances of success at remembering the new information, as well as build the capability to deploy that new stuff in different musical situations. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Chris. Today you will learn about chord and scale nesting. As I mentioned at the top, when we learn a new chord or scale, it can seem like it's a different thing, right? And rightly so. When you play a chord, you play all the notes at one time, right? When you play a scale, they're one note at a time, right? So they seem very, very different. We use them differently. The truth is, though, that chords come from scales. They are generated by scales. We combine and repurpose the notes of a scale to generate chords. And so by nature, they have a lot more in common than is generally clear to us when we learn them separately. I'm going to explain what this nesting idea is. That's not going to be very long because it's a very simple idea. Then we're going to zoom in and apply that method directly to the fretboard where it makes the most sense. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who supports me on my Patreon page. It's through their support on that channel that I'm able to do this, bring you these lessons and this information. If you're enjoying the channel and you want to get a little bit deeper or just show your support, head on over to Patreon and see what I offer there. There's a free trial, so you can take a look at everything without any obligation. If you do decide to support the channel, thanks in advance. So what is chord and scale nesting? It's a very, very simple idea. As I mentioned before, chords come from scales. We use the notes, we combine and repurpose the notes in a scale to generate chords. This nesting idea is simply taking a chord, playing the scale of origin around it so you can see all the material at once. When I demonstrate this, you'll recognize right away that you've heard guitar players do this kind of thing before. Use both of these pieces of information at the same time, effectively combining rhythm and lead elements at the same time. Let's zoom in and stick this on the fretboard where it belongs. Okay, we're going to start with our trusty A major bar chord. I'm just going to play the notes on the D, G, and B string. That's A, C sharp, and E. Those are the only notes in an A chord. But they also happen to be the root, the third, and the fifth of the A major scale. So what we're going to do is nest these two things together. That scale of origin, where that chord comes from, as well as the chord. Now, I could just give you the fret numbers and we'd be off and running, but what I'm going to do instead is put the formula for the major scale down here so that we can take these notes and find the scale tones around them without necessarily just memorizing the frets, right? But using our brain and using this formula. And the distance between these notes, which is either a whole step, that's what those W's are, or a half step, that's where the H's come in. Okay. The constraint is going to be, we're going to stay on the D, G, and B string, and we're going to find all these notes around the chord, but we're not going to go above the 7th fret or below the 4th fret, and we're going to stay on these 3 strings. Here we go. Got the root right here, right? That second note is a whole step away, but we don't want to go above the 7th fret, right? I want to keep it all in one spot. So I got to find this note on the next string. There's our 2, right? There's our 2nd degree. The 3rd note is in the chord already. The distance between the 3 and the 4 is only a half step. The 5 is already in our chord. The 6 is a whole step away from the 5. Now the 7 is a whole step away from the 6. That's way up here. We want to stay below that 7th fret. So I've got to find this note somewhere else. I'm going to take it down an octave, put it right behind the root on that D string. So let me show you how that works. Root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root. Now we've got all the notes that generate this chord right around the chord itself. We've nested them together. We can see the whole thing. Very cool, right? I'm going to do it again, but this time on this set of strings. That's the G, B, and E string. Now the chord is 3, 5, root. The root is on top. Using that same constraint, we want to stay on these 3 strings, stay in that little chunk of fretboard. Here we go. Root, up a whole step to the 2. The 3rd is already in our chord. Half step from the 3 to the 4. 5 is already in our chord. 6 is only up a whole step. The 7th is a half step below the root. So that looks like this. There's the other one we started with. Now, getting both of those pieces of information, those 2 chord voicings and the scale all around it, look what I'm able to do with that information. Right? I'm using double stops. I'm only using the information that we started with, and I'm able to do something melodic and interesting. Pretty cool, right? You can instantly recognize that guitar players use this stuff. Pro guitar players use this information. They use these 2 pieces of information, the scale of origin, and the chord itself, to combine to give them a lot of opportunity. I'm going to do one more thing, and that is I'm going to take this one we started with, and I'm just going to invert this up the fretboard. I want to show you how I do that. I've got the root, the 3rd, and the 5th. I'm going to take the root, I'm going to move it up until I find the 3rd, move the 3rd up to the 5th, and move that 5th up to the root. Here's my new A chord. This is now 3, 5, root on the top. Here's that same idea. Up a whole step from the root to the 2nd. 3rd is already in the chord. Half step to the 4. 5 is already in the chord. 6 is a whole step up. 7 is right behind the root. As you can see, I've got all kinds of melodic information around this, right? Now, I've just done a few inversions of A. There are 12 inversions just of the A chord itself on the fretboard. Not to mention the fact that we could do this with minor chords. Any chord, any scale, as long as you know the relationship, the scale of origin of the chord you're building, and you can nest those 2 pieces of information, you have access to everything that makes sense for that specific chord. Okay, there it is. Through this nesting method, you can see how chords are built. You can see all the information that relates to a chord sitting right around it, right? You hear guitar players using this kind of stuff all the time, and this methodology is the gateway. It's the way in. It's the way to start building that capability and that technique. Tabs for this lesson are available on my Patreon page. That's always linked in the description of every video on the channel. Head on over there if you want to grab them. I hope you found this interesting. I hope it's been helpful for you. Stay curious, and I'll see you next time.